Hello and welcome to the Arise interview, where we take time to reflect on the big stories from the news and on the fortunes and affairs of the world in an hour of conversation with commentators, analysts and thought leaders. I'm Charles Anyegolu. Coming up in the next 60 minutes, as unbridled, almost unmanageable, unimaginable insecurity continues to plague many parts of Nigeria, bringing with it the kind of associated fear, anxiety and vulnerability that comes with such hazardous conditions. We'll speak to the former US ambassador to Nigeria, John Campbell, whose book, Nigeria, Dancing on the Brink, examines the events and conditions that have carried Africa's troubled giant to the edge. How is it that Nigeria has become one of the most religious countries in the world and at the same time one of the most violent nations on the planet? Ambassador John Campbell, former US ambassador to Nigeria, in a moment. And later, in the midst of the latest attack on a secondary school in the north-central region of Nigeria, as the defense minister tells citizens to fight back and not to run away if they are attacked by armed men, in effect asking them to turn into unarmed vigilantes at considerable risk to their own lives, we'll speak to the maverick entertainer and veteran activist Charlie Boy for his reaction and assessment of the current situation in Nigeria. The singer, songwriter, social critic and mass mobilizer Charlie Boy, coming up. Now, my first guest today, John Campbell, is a senior fellow for African policy studies at the Council on Foreign Relations in Washington and was the US ambassador to Nigeria from 2004 to 2007, having previously served in the country as political counselor from 1988 to 1990. He's the author of the new book, Nigeria and the Nation State, Rethinking Diplomacy with the Post-Colonial World, published in December. And he also writes the blog Africa in Transition. In 2010, Ambassador Campbell published his first book titled Nigeria, Dancing on the Brink. The second edition of the book was published in June 2013. Mr. Campbell has also written Nigeria, What Everyone Needs to Know, co-authored with Matthew Page and published in July 2018. In his latest book, mentioned earlier, Ambassador Campbell argues that governance faces grievous structural challenges in Nigeria, and along with the country's colonial history and flawed elections, has undermined the credibility of successive governments and left Nigeria's conflicts unresolved, including its ethnic rivalries and, of course, security challenges. And Ambassador John Campbell joins me now from Washington. Thank you very much indeed for joining us and finding the time to talk to us. A busy day, I understand, ahead for you, so we appreciate the time. Let's just first of all start by asking you to give us your reaction to the latest security challenges in Nigeria. As you might have heard, some students have been abducted yet again by armed gunmen in the north of Nigeria.
Yes, that's right. To me, the most striking thing about the security challenges that Nigeria is facing is that they've become virtually nationwide. There is the Boko Haram insurrection in the Northeast. There are Islamist groups active increasingly in the Northwest. There is strife over water and land use in the Middle Belt, which sometimes acquires an ethnic and religious dimension. The oil patch seems to be bubbling, though thus far the violence there seems to be low level. And then throughout the country, there is a crime wave in which kidnapping appears to be particularly prominent. The crime wave and the kidnapping, I think, are highly demoralizing. for many Nigerians who have been relatively untouched by the insurrections in the Northeast, the Northwest, or the quarrels in the Middle Belt. But it is the fact that the insecurity has become so extensive that I think is fundamentally new. I would call attention to the testimony yesterday in the Senate by the former service chiefs, which I think provided an insightful analysis as to what is going on in the Northeast.
And Ambassador Campbell, when you look at violent extremism and criminality in Nigeria, are there particular driving factors that you notice, a correlation perhaps between those issues and poverty, for instance, and bad governance and corruption?
Not so much poverty. Poverty, of course, is very widespread in Nigeria, and some of the most impoverished parts of the country have been relatively free of violence. I would put more of a focus on poor and unresponsive governance, as well as corruption, particularly when it involves the police and other officials, because of course they are the face of the government for ordinary people. So I would put the focus on poor and unresponsive governance rather than on poverty per se.
I mean, you've obviously had extensive experience in and around Nigeria. I mean, you've written a number of books. You were ambassador to this country for a number of years, and you're a bit of an expert on not just Nigeria, but Africa. I mean, how should Nigeria apply the lessons, for example, that you talk about in your book to this country, that advice? I'm just wondering whether or not, beyond obviously writing those very interesting books, whether you write, for instance, to the Nigerian leadership or perhaps to the US government, outlining what you think needs to be done to move Nigeria forward and away from terrorism and banditry.
I think there are lessons that are applicable to Nigeria to be learned from Afghanistan and also Iraq. And that is the fact that action very often has a criminal dimension to it. I think it does in Nigeria. But insurrection cannot be put down solely with the hammer. There has to be a political dimension to responding to it. Here, I think improvement in governance, particularly the governance that ordinary people see, is particularly important. The former service chiefs yesterday, in talking to the Senate, observed that a military solution in the Northeast, in and of itself, is not likely to work. And I think that is exactly right. There has to be a governance and a political dimension to it. Now, I don't mean to minimize just how difficult that is. For example, the governor of Borno State, if I understand it correctly, has urged those living in internally displaced person camps to return home and return to farming. That's very difficult to do when, in fact, militant Islamists, Boko Haram, are able to roam through the countryside and, in fact, have targeted farmers working in the fields. So I don't mean to minimize just how difficult this is. It's going to require very high levels of political skill, and it's also going to require consistent application.
Well, those are interesting points that you raise, and one of the things that have been spoken about. I mean, I want to talk a little bit about the other problems that Nigeria also faces, such as ethnic conflict and so on. But one of the things that have been spoken about is that Nigeria does not seem to hold those who incite, encourage, or commit these acts of violence accountable, because we know that in the international context, accountability is incredibly important, isn't it?
It is indeed. It's absolutely incredibly important. And when something dreadful happens, and it is announced that there is going to be a government inquiry, the inquiry takes place, but it is never made public. But then it leaks out. And all that does is undermine the credibility of official institutions. Similarly, the closure of certain areas to the media, in my view, essentially fosters rumor mongering and also undermines the credibility of the authorities.
And let me just mention the ethnic identity threat, which is often motivated and mobilized by people and politicians who take advantage of the fault lines in Nigerian society. And if Nigeria is ever going to be able to address this, obviously it has to address the structural imbalances in the country. I wonder what your take is on that and what your experience of it was when you were ambassador here.
This is a very long-standing issue. How do you balance the large number of separate, different ethnic groups? This is an issue that the British colonial authorities dealt with. It was an issue that since independence, Nigeria has tried to address in numerous ways. Broadly, I think, under the rubric of federal character. What I would suggest, humbly, is that a way to develop a common sense of Nigerian nationality across and religious lines is for the Nigerian government to deliver services which the entire population can benefit from. What do I mean by services?
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Ambassador. I'm just going to ask you to hold that thought. We're going to continue with it once we come back from break. You're watching the Arise interview. Plenty more still ahead as we continue our chat with the former U.S. Ambassador to Nigeria, John Campbell, author of several books about Nigeria. Stay with us. And Ambassador John Campbell is still with me from Washington. Thank you very much indeed for staying with us. And before we went on break, and I apologize, I interrupted your flow of thought there. We were talking about the ethnic identity threat in Nigeria and what needs to be done to address the structural imbalances in this country.
And I would like to suggest that the issue is not so much ethnic identity, but a lack of an overarching national identity. A Nigerian friend of mine last week said that she knew perfectly well what it meant to be a Yoruba, perfectly well what it meant to be a Christian, and perfectly well what it meant to be a member of a family. But she didn't really know what it meant to be a Nigerian. And I think there, the development of an overarching Nigerian national identity is a key to the country's moving forward. How do you do that? You do that by the face of Nigerian nationality, that is to say, the government, providing services to ordinary Nigerian people, and at the same time, ending the abuse of ordinary Nigerians. I'm thinking, for example, of things like police checkpoints, where people are regularly subject to demands for bribes. They're small. And the reason for the bribes is very often that the police haven't been paid for months, and their salaries are so low that it would be hard for them to support their families. Nevertheless, that syndrome of officials extracting bribes from ordinary people is terribly destructive to the development of pride in and a sense of Nigerian nationality.
That's a very good point. And just to try to take that a little bit further in terms of tangible things that can be done beyond obviously the things that you're saying, because I mean, you know, the people are they're gonna say, yes, that's a jolly good thing to say, but we don't have the money. Some people have proposed a Truth and Reconciliation Commission to look at and reckon with Nigeria's past history. I mean, in your excellent book, you talked about Nigeria's colonial past, both the gory and the glory, and to find a way to come together as a country and figure out how they want to move forward. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
I think that's very much an idea worth exploring. I saw firsthand the operation of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa. Now, it by no means solved all of South Africa's problems, but it became a means by which an immensely complicated society could reckon with the past. And that, I think, promoted a greater degree of national health than its absence would have allowed. So I think it's very much something that's worth thinking about doing. Now, here's the issue. The issue is, if you have a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the commissioners must be of impeccable reputation. They must be people who have universal admiration. And there's the South Africans are extremely lucky, because the head of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was Archbishop Tutu, a person nearly universally admired in the country, and whose integrity was unimpeachable.
Well, I know you've got to run in a minute. You've got other appointments, and as I said, we appreciate your presence. So in the last few minutes that we've got, I want to look at a little bit about one of your books, Nigeria, Dancing on the Brink, in which you explore Nigeria's post-colonial history and examine the events and conditions that have carried what you described as the troubled giant to the edge. Just tell us a little bit more about what the book explores. I know it's not your latest book, but it's a fascinating read.
Thank you very much for that. When I wrote the book, what I was most concerned about was sounding a warning which I had picked up from Nigerians when I was in Nigeria, and also sounding a warning to American policymakers who I thought, and still do think, often do not accord Nigeria the importance that the country intrinsically commands. Nigeria really is the giant of Africa. And it's well known that UN population experts predict that by 2050, less than 30 years from now, Nigeria's population will exceed that of the United States, and it will be the third largest country by population in the world. What happens in Nigeria deeply matters and is going to even more deeply matter to the United States. And therefore, Nigeria should be a primary focus of our international foreign policy.
And it's interesting that you've written several books now. I think there's actually 3 now on Nigeria, which clearly underscores your interest in the country. The latest one is Nigeria and the Nation State, Rethinking Diplomacy with the Post-Colonial World. It was published in December. Briefly, just tell us what it's about.
What it is, a sort of central argument, is that we foreign friends of Nigeria tend to interact with the country in much the same way that we would with other nation states, France, Canada, Germany, so forth. My suggestion is that Nigeria is not a conventional nation state, that it is something else, and as such shares with other post-colonial states. And that a more effective, a more productive way to conduct a bilateral relationship is by a much more decentralized diplomacy. In other words, not a sole focus or largely sole focus on the presidency, the foreign ministry, and the National Assembly, but rather contacts, developing much richer contacts with other aspects of Nigerian society.
Okay, I'm absolutely, very, very sorry for interrupting you there, Ambassador, but we're out of time and I know you've got to go. Ambassador John Campbell, former US Ambassador to Nigeria and author of several books on this country.